Hello. This is Dimitri, aka Jeff Soboroff, and I wanted to publish this on social media as an appeal um to an independent news organization I'm trying to make who talk about these social issues but actually have really don't have a direct connection with anybody who has been in a situation that they have reported on. When I was arrested and jailed and convicted of terrorism for writing a joke on the web. It took the Iowa Supreme Court 2.5 years to decide that writing a joke about rednecks, shit kickers, racists, and other kinds of assholes of that nature was not a crime. And while I was in federal prison, because during the time I was in state prison, a person who I thought was a friend of mine and who I had done business for 30 years, who had stored everything I owned, and apparently including my bank card, who now refuses to give those things back, by the way. Over $100,000 worth of vintage musical instruments, recording equipment, etc. When I was charged with embezzling money from Social Security, which, before I went to prison, I informed Social Security that I was going to be locked down. I sent 3 letters. I sent a letter to Baltimore, I sent a letter to my local office, and I sent a letter to the office in Davenport of Social Security that apparently has something to do with the local office. And those letters were ignored. Those letters were ignored because in 1996 I won an appeal for a Social Security beneficiary named Wanda Butler. Now, I am not Clarence Darrow or Perry Mason, who, by the way, is a fictional character. I'm not even that smart. But I have taken the cause up for many people who have disputes with Social Security, and I have been in front of numerous administrative law judges for that agency, and I never lost a case. Never lost a case. And when I won Wanda Butler's appeal, and Wanda Butler is a person who was obtained through human traffic as an infant. When I became involved in Wanda's case, I immediately asked to see her entire Social Security file, and it took me the better part of 3 years to get it. And when I examined that file, I was amazed at what was going on, and my amazement was caused because this drug family, this person who had been obtained through human traffic, was now ensconced in a drug family and lived primarily under a condition of involuntary imprisonment, which of course is a serious felony. And well, I knew Wanda and rented her a room in my home, which, by the way, was free. She originally asked if she could rent me a room, and I said, well, how much can you afford to pay? And I knew that her situation was dire because many years before I had noticed her around. She always seemed to be like a very cogent person. I never saw her cause any trouble. I never saw her do anything untoward. And when I suggested that, well, if you, she told me her payee refused to give her any of her Social Security entitlement. So I did an investigation. The bank where her payee and her had a joint account, in that bank was a person who I had been friends with for several years. They knew who I was, that person knew who I was, and what kind of person I was, and did, in fact, bring to me and show me, did not give me the records, but I was able to determine from those bank records that less than 24 hours after the check was deposited in the joint bank account of Wanda's payee, Ruth, and herself, less than 24 hours later, it would be transferred to a third party's bank account in its entirety. This is totally against Social Security regulations. It's a felony. And that started me thinking about what some of the other butlers told me 5 weeks after she had moved across state lines and was allowed to reside in my house rent-free. The payee took documents which were nearly 20 years old to Illinois Public Aid, and they were able to successfully stop Wanda Butler's medical entitlement and her food stamps. Now, I told Wanda, I said, look, Wanda, I'm a rich guy. You shouldn't fuck with this. Don't even think about it. I'll take care of you. I like you. I eventually married Wanda. She was the nicest person I have ever met in my life. She's gracious. She's forgiving. She's tolerant. She's kind. She's gentle. She's everything you would want in a companion. Wanda has been raped all of her life since she was an infant. According to the records I was able to uncover from Social Security, and there were Justice Department documents in that file, and a notable Justice Department document that I found in that file was where the Justice Department instructed Social Security to no longer deal with Ruth Butler. You see, Ruth Butler claimed on a federal document that she was Wanda Butler's mother. However, there was no record of it anywhere to be found. There was no birth certificate. There was nothing. And personally, I don't know any mothers who've ever lost their birth certificates. Ruth Butler claimed that because Wanda was delivered by a midwife, that those records probably didn't exist. However, the nature of midwifery dictates that they give the courthouse the same kind of information on a birth that an OBGYN has to provide, or any other medical professional. The Justice Department conducted an investigation along with the Department of Census, and they found no record of a birth of a child named Wanda being born to this Ruth Butler in the year that Ruth Butler claimed she was born. An interesting side note is that no record of a birth of a child named Wanda to a woman named Ruth Butler had been recorded anywhere during the previous year or during the year afterwards. She had no births. And the Justice Department ended up telling Social Security that Ruth Butler was not kosher. That was not the term they used, but I think you know what I mean. And that they needed to find another payee for this child. Social Security instead sent a letter to Ruth Butler making her a fabulous offer in the days before DNA technology. And they told her if she took a simple type matching test, which would have given her a fair chance of winning this lottery, they told her to take a blood test to show the possibility of maternity, and they would turn over at that time, which would something like between $8,000 and $12,000, which had accrued in this account for the beneficiary. Ruth Butler refused to take that test. Now, it does not take a Mensa candidate to figure out what that means. When the mother of a child refuses to take a blood test to show the possibility of maternity. She refused to take the test because she was aware that a negative result would result in her being prosecuted for fraud. That's the way it works when you issue a false statement to the federal government. 29 years later, over $100,000 was given to this alleged payee, which the beneficiary never saw any of, but the streets did, because Ruth Butler ran a family drug cartel, which has since been taken over by other butlers, such as Linda Butler, Sheila Butler, a number of butlers who happen to be Ruth's real children have taken over that task. But Wanda never received any of that money. And the Butlers are infamous in this area for their association with cocaine and the dealing of such. There's a lot more to that story that is available, and it's on my website, www.freeworldkgb.freeservice.com. However, the upshot is that I became convinced that there was something going on. The Butlers told me they had to deal with the cops on both sides of the river. They could do whatever they wanted to. At the time, I was a rich guy. Had a home, a car, $100,000 worth of recording equipment. And what ends up happening is Ruth Butler takes $100,000 and turns it into cocaine. And she's got her minions selling this on the street. And they were harassing Wanda. They started to send phone messages to my mother, who was in her 70s. And I don't know how they got my mother's number. I don't think Wanda gave it to them. At the time, I don't think Wanda knew it. It was an unlisted phone number. There are only two entities that you can get an unlisted number from. The phone company, who won't give it to you because it's unlisted. And then there's law enforcement. And as the Butlers had already told me that I should permit Wanda to sell their nefarious substances out of my house, nothing would happen to me. They have a deal with the Rock Island police. My mistake was I didn't take them up on their offer. I told them I didn't want to be a vampire. Wanda didn't want to have anything more to do with the people who had raped her all of her life. And I told them to bugger off. They burned down 6 of my cars. The investigations involving the Rock Island police with the destruction of those cars, their conclusion was, I just wanted to make a false report. They didn't charge me with filing a false report. But what they wrote was, I just wanted to make a false report just to keep this aggravating thing going on. During the time I lived with Wanda, I watched the authorities forcibly place her back into a crack house against her will. That story is also on my website. What I wanted to talk to this independent news agency about, and I realize it's really hard to get into that. People got a bone to pick. Nobody knows the truth unless they personally investigate. I was shot at over 24 times. While I was on the street helping my crew doing their investigations, I had to check out everything my crew told me. I recruited my website crew from graduates of correctional facilities because they have the look much as I do, and we infiltrated a lot of these family-run drug cartels, and we got the goods on everybody. Well, I was a rich guy. Shortly before Merrill Lynch stole my money from me by converting a AAA bond fund into junk bonds. There's a reason why they call them junk bonds. I don't have to go into that. But, well, I was a rich guy. I bought $7,000 worth of video equipment. Some of it was so small and sophisticated you could put it in the buttonhole of your shirt, and I caught everybody, including the police, who were allowing, from both sides of the river, from Davenport and Rock Island, East Moline, Silvis, that's on the Illinois side of the river, Bettendorf, etc. And I moved my operation to Clinton County, where I discovered more drug dealing, not only between the police, not only a deal between the police and these drug dealers, but where the court actually got involved in allowing 2 adults, Stephen and Jonathan Helke, who were 25 and 22-year-old respectively, who were investigated and busted because they had given cocaine to high school students to sell in the Clinton High School. Now, I read about this in the newspaper while I was sitting in jail because I had been arrested. Because an alcoholic bartender, a person who has been pulled out of her car, at the time I looked, which was several years ago, she had been pulled out of her car 21 times for not having a seatbelt, and almost every time they pulled her out of her car, she had alcohol on her breath. So this woman has also faced more than 3 DUI charges. Now, her and her husband are very rich, and are landowners in Calamus, Iowa. So Wanda Elias was allowed to present testimony in a federal trial where I was accused of threatening to shoot her when she made the night deposit from Steffen's Tap, which is down at the end of the block. Now, Steffen's Tap is the bar where Wanda Butler had a bona fide hate crime committed against her. Wanda's report of that is only on YouTube because Sheriff Lincoln of Clinton County, who had promised me when I reported what was going on. He promised me, well, if Wanda should come back here, he didn't expect her to. These people threatened to lynch her. Practically threatened to lynch her. He told me if Wanda comes back, we'll take a report and we'll investigate. Surprisingly enough, Wanda did come back. And the reason why Wanda came back is because I was the only person who never took advantage of her. I never asked her to do anything she didn't want to do. I never forced her to do anything. So she came back. But the police who are in charge of law enforcement in Calamus, it's not the Clinton County Police, refused to take that report of a hate crime. So Wanda made a 30-second statement, which is now on YouTube. It's on my channel, and it may be on YouTube in general. It's called Steffen's Incident. This is what they did to Wanda. And she walked 50 miles back into the situation that she found herself in as an infant. She didn't want to be there. But when people act like they're going to lynch you, where can you go? You can't stay in Calamus. I eventually found out, after I ran Wanda's statement, and before I ran Wanda's statement, Wanda said that she just left without telling me she was leaving because she didn't want me to get into trouble. Because she knew I'd defend her, and I would get to the bottom of this, and I did. Within a couple of days of these people scaring Wanda enough so that she left on foot to go back to an intolerable, abusive, humiliating, and degrading situation, people in Calamus started telling me how they ran that nigger out of town. I don't generally use that word. As a matter of fact, I never use it. My parents didn't raise me that way. And I do have to say at this time that Eastern Iowa is one of the most racist places I've ever been in. And I was a road musician for a long, long time. I was in places where you would expect a person with my skin complexion is so minimally darker than the people who live in Calamus. That it is amazing to me that 5 minutes after I started to unload things into a bar I had bought from a friend, I was being shot at in Rock Island, and after reporting that 17 times, I was charged with telephone harassment just for telling the pigs where they might be able to pick up grass. But I expect that, because I was only shot at after I gave an hour-and-a-half compilation of the Best of the Brooks family, who ran a barbershop called the Cut Creators, only 8 blocks away from where I used to live in Rock Island, and Terry Brooks, who was the Rock Island city alderman for the west end of Rock Island, which is predominantly a black area of town. During my 12-year investigation, I was able to videotape a lot of drug dealing coming out of this establishment, the Cut Creators. I gave an hour-and-a-half of that to Mr. Williams, who runs Crime Stoppers. And he gave that tape back to the people who run the barbershop. And people started to shoot at me, which is why I moved my center of operations to Calamus, Iowa. Because if you look on my website, you will know the license plate, which comes from Clinton. And these people used to sit in that barber shop with the lights off all night long. Well, people came to that area to purchase crack cocaine and other narcotics from the people who would be in that barber shop. And if they didn't go directly to the barber shop, they could easily find somebody about a block away on a corner who was carrying their shit on them. This is where people came. So people started to shoot at me, and the police let them. And if I wanted protection, I would be charged with harassment. When I started to publish what I published, and I waited for a number of years to publish my website about this drug dealing and about Wanda's situation, which included naming the names of every federal and state puke who was obligated after a 10-year-old child walked into their offices and told them that she was being sexually abused. These people were obligated to get the authorities involved, and they refused to do it. So DHS, Social Security, and the Department of Human Services, Children and Family Resources, and all of the rest of the white people who are supposed to ensure that every child, black or white, is protected from such activities. They locked her out of their offices, and they would only deal with her primary sexual abuser, who by this time had received that $100,000 and had turned it into crack cocaine and other illicit substances. And it was only after I published my website that the state of Illinois tried to commit me 3 times. They tried to commit me because of my website. They tried to commit, and you know, analog doesn't lie. When I started my website, I knew I could have gotten digital. I would have gotten better images. It would have been easier to, I wouldn't have had to buy a assortment of external devices so that I could make videos out of it, so that I could get them into my computer, so that I could get them on the web. But you can't, and you know, the thing is, you also can't alter a digital image. That leaves artifact. It's slightly harder to detect, but it's real easy to detect a edit that you've made in an analog tape. It's there. It's on whatever copy you make. It's called a splice. You can't splice that without people knowing. So I've got this shit on a medium where you can tell if it's either the original, a direct copy of the original, or a copy that has been altered. You can tell. In any case, I ended up doing almost 4.5 years in custody, either state and federal, just because of the stand that I took against drugs, and because I named every federal and state puke who has earned 5 years in prison but will never see it, because they didn't help a child who was being raped. And when you're a mandatory reporter, you gotta investigate. You have to get people involved in this investigation. You don't just lock a person up. You just don't lock a person out of your offices who says they're being raped. This is what the American government did to a black child. They did it to a black child who I care about. Because I cared about this situation, and largely I got that $7,000 worth of equipment because having been a musician from a very early age, I started at 7 and I started to do recording studios when I was 14. I lost everybody that I knew, cared about, looked up to, people who were better dressed, better spoken, better musicians than I, destroyed themselves with narcotics. And as I did my investigation, I began to see a correlation between what the butlers were telling me, that the police were involved in this and were letting them conduct their business. Well, the police had let the first ward alderman of Rock Island conduct that kind of business for umpteen years. I like to think that it's the things that I published on the web about Terry Brooks, which removed what I thought was going to be his lifetime tenure with the Rock Island city administration as alderman. But another thing happened too. I was barred from Rock Island City Council meetings. I took a tape to these guys that was a half hour long. By the time I got it back from the black chief of police, and he had told me, look, I watched this thing 12 times. I don't see anything on it. When I got back the tape, half of it had been erased, it had been condensed, and they gave it back to me. When I ran the tape past a blank spot, and I knew it was a blank spot that had been recorded over, you can tell that when you play a video. It was recorded over. Well, they didn't do it long enough. So the end of my tape was on the end of that VHS tape that I gave me. I also submitted a tape to Sergeant Talbot of the Rock Island County Police, who told me he would look into it. Now, a few days later, the county police and the city police were engaging in an improper stop. They sat at the end of the Centennial Bridge waiting for people to come over from Iowa to get their last hour of drinking in, because the bars close an hour earlier in Davenport than they do in Rock Island. And they stopped some guys who had a warrant for drugs. And Mr. Talbot reached in. The guy didn't shut off his car, and Mr. Talbot reached in to his into the car to turn off the ignition key, something he shouldn't have done. The car took off, and he became caught on something that was in the car, and they dragged him for a few blocks. Two Rock Island police officers, a guy named Sullivan and a guy named Landy, commandeer somebody's car, which, by the way, commandeering somebody's car is only something that you can do in a Clint Eastwood movie. Clint Eastwood can do it. But you can't. The Rock Island police can't do that. They're not allowed to do that. The insurance won't cover it. Meanwhile, I've got one of my ne'er-do-wells in the neighborhood with a video camera. It was his video camera. And he's making a VHS tape with his video camera over his shoulder. And he recorded the last few moments of Mr. Talbot's life when he was able to free himself from the car. And he's trying to get off the street, pick himself up, when Landy and Sullivan ran him over. Now, it was interesting to me to read the coroner's report because they reported that Mr. Talbot was dead when he hit this pavement. But he wasn't. Mr. Landy Sullivan ended his life because I saw that videotape. Now, my friend wanted to, and you know, I already had a deal with this guy, and I would pay him for his videotapes, and I absolutely was going to do that, but he wanted $500,000 for this videotape. So I was only permitted to see it. I didn't get a copy of it. I didn't get the tape. But I saw a guy who was alive 1 minute and dead as soon as the Rock Island Police Force crushed him, and something occurs in my mind. Maybe they did it on purpose. Maybe Mr. Landy really was looking into what was on that videotape, because I know that Landy and Sullivan have engaged in messing with the system to allow a person named Xavier Holliday to escape prosecution. That's an interesting story too. I believe that's on my website also. In any case, I'm issuing this appeal to the Young Turks. I've been in this for a long time. I've been shot at so many times, I'm the thing that cannot die. I've had 5 rabbis telling me that the reason I wasn't killed is because God wanted me to do what I was doing. I don't know. Maybe God is just a sadistic voyeur who wants to watch me suffer. I don't know. I do know that we all have something to contribute. I believe it's because of my website, because of the work I did in Rock Island, which has made it so that Illinois has become one of the latest states to make it a felony to train a camera on a policeman while he's in the act of conducting public corruption. Now, there are other videos and pictures on my website which were taken before this law was enacted, which clearly show police involvement in this activity. How they ignore people who are standing on the corner of Crack Avenue and 11th Street, who will stay there all day. As a matter of fact, there are pictures and videos of drug sales going on while people are drinking open liquor on the street. An interesting story to include there is the story of Mr. Polis, a Rock Island policeman who had informed me. If you can get videotapes of these people even spitting on the sidewalk, I will personally go there and handcuff them. So, I take a video that I just made of these people drinking some Johnny Walker Black Label, and Mr. Polis is at the station. I just drove to the station, and I see Polis. He's sitting at the desk, and I say, "This is what you wanted to see. Go get him." And he asked me what it is. So I told him, and he threatened to arrest me unless I took myself and my garbage out of the station. That's the nature of the Rock Island Police. That's the nature of police in general in this area. The blue code, you don't turn in your friends when you know they're breaking the law. If you're a policeman, you don't turn in your friends. If you do, watch Serpico and see what happens to you. In any case, this is my appeal to the Young Turks. I really need to talk to you, Cenk. I need to talk to you. Just for a little bit. If you don't think that my personal experiences are relative to the same types of things that you report on every day, well, then you can tell me I'm full of shit. But I warn you, everything that you're going to read that has been published by the government about me is just not true. In my role of doing what I've done for Free World KGB, and because of it, I have spent I spent almost 5 years in lockdown situations, both in state and federal prison. How I wound up in federal prison is a very interesting story. So I'm just appealing to you. Please call me. You can call me at 563 579 0553. I don't want any callers from scammers who live in Africa or someplace else who want me to support them, who are going to send me nude pictures, who are going to say, hey, I'll do anything you want me to do. Just send me a ticket. Because that stuff never works. I'm currently writing a book on internet scams, which include many facets of it. And what I have found is that when people are scammed successfully and they try to involve the Federal Trade Commission in being scammed over the wire in one way or another, the Federal Trade Commission does nothing. Oh, well, we'll take your information, and then they put your information in a file and it sits there. I have personally received altered financial documents from several of these people. I have called up the police departments in the cities where those things were generated and where they came from. I have been invited by detectives to send me their material via email. They give me their email address, and what ends up happening is that when I send them the email, they send it back to me. They don't want it. Well, they're talking to me on the phone. Well, I'm making a recording of them talking to me. They want it. And then I get an automated response that says, no, we don't want to do this. One of the reasons why there's so much scamming is because the federal government refuses to stop it. It's wire fraud. It's a serious felony. But the federal government doesn't want to become involved. A lot of this scamming takes place internationally. But the addresses and names of the agents that I had who would... I spend my own money for stories. Sometimes when these people ask me to send them money, I will send them money. Just to get the name of the person who is picking up the money from Western Union. The name and the address. They got to give Western Union their name and address, etc., etc. These people are in this country. There should be no problem. There's a problem, though. It's a federal offense. So, local police and the federales have a pissing contest. That screws up an investigation. These people are associated with people who live in countries where if you send money, you could be financing terrorism. And I'd like to stop it. I'd like somebody to do something. Well, in the many, many years that I've done this, not one police agency, including Interpol, will get involved. Now, I go on the Interpol website, and they're dealing with some serious shit. They're busting slave traders. There's slavery still going on. They're busting slave traders in Africa still. They're busting them. This is important stuff. And yeah, it would take precedence over somebody getting scammed because they thought they were going to get laid or getting married. You know, a lot of the people who are scammed are just old, lonely people, and they've lost their life's mate, and they're lonely, and people will take advantage of that. People will take advantage of that in the most disgusting and, quite frankly, inhuman ways. But our government won't do anything about that. Not even when those people are located in this country. So, Cenk, I'd like to talk to you about my experiences. I know you're real busy. You want to be mad on the internet. It's really easy to be mad on the internet. I have actually put videos on Facebook and Google and things where I am personally pissed off at the way Iowa Legal Aid, for instance, doesn't want to help a black person. It's true. It's true. I was told by Iowa Legal Aid that Wanda's case was a lost cause and that she would never win. But I won it. I won it because I received a telephone message on my answering machine wherein the payee herself declared that she'd never paid Wanda any of her money and she never was going to. And it still took me 3 years to get that in front of an administrative law judge. And I took that recording to Social Security litigators on both sides of the Mississippi, in Iowa and Illinois. Before Dave Bain stole my car, I operated within a 100-mile radius of Davenport. I contacted attorneys personally, in person, by driving to their offices. I contacted attorneys by email. I gave them what I had, which was the payee's admission that they were violating the law, that they were depriving a Social Security beneficiary of all of her entitlements. When Ruth Butler was trying to force Wanda back there, she took documents that were nearly 20 years old to an agency which can only accept a document if it's 5 years old. And they looked at these 20-year-old documents and they decided Wanda didn't need food stamps. You know, the Social Security system and public aid are required to visit a beneficiary's home to determine if they live there, to determine if they have proper living conditions. In the years that Wanda was in my house, no such person came to my home to interview Wanda or me yet. They stopped Wanda's medical and food stamps 8 times in 1 year. But they refused to visit the home. They received letters from my parents, whose name was on the deed to my home until they died. And my parents told them Wanda was living there for free. The state of Illinois recognized that Wanda wasn't getting her money from her payee. And during the first year Wanda was with me, they sent her half of the money she should have received from Social Security. Now, this is Wanda's nature. She insisted that I take that check and give it to my mother, because she didn't want to be a bum. She didn't want to be mooching off me or my parents. And my parents didn't care. My parents said my mother wouldn't take the check from her. She said, "Here, you use this." But that's the dichotomy between a state government I mean, in some ways, it was, in a major way, it was different. They sent her money back. They sent her money from Illinois because she wasn't being supported by her payee, who's legally obligated to give her money, to pay her rent, to pay her bills. What you gonna do, Saul? Cenk, I need to talk to you. Because, this hasn't only happened to Wanda. When I was doing my investigation about this drug business, which flourishes in the Quad Cities, only because of police cooperation, I met dozens of women, all with their front teeth knocked out, who come from the same kind of milieu, who face the same kind of problem, who get no protection from the police or from the social agencies that they deal with. And now we've elected a president who's what he is. I mean, I keep seeing pictures on YouTube and reports on YouTube about how the Trump family is closely associated with the Ku Klux Klan. I have even heard and seen evidence which is supposed to purport that Mr. Trump's father and grandfather were card-carrying members of that organization. Please contact me, Cenk. I only want to help. And there are so many people who need to be. 563-579-0553. I know how dangerous it is for me to publish this like this, but I have tried to reach you through the Young Turks, and I haven't been able to. You can reach me. I really wish that you would. Thank you for your time and attention to these matters. This is Dmitry Ivanovich, a.k.a. Jeff Soberoff, with the not-so-naked truth today.